Hello, I'm Dr. Robert Evans III, founder and CEO of Empowerment Counseling and Training Services, and I'm here to bring to you the third and final part of a series on new normal discussions. Today we're going to be talking about implicit bias. I'm going to give you some tips on how to manage this bias, and I'm going to give you some better understanding of what it is. Before we get started, to truly experience the benefits of the information that we're about to cover, there's two things you're going to need in your possession. The first thing is desire. You got a desire to want to connect with other people, desire to want to grow, desire to want to be better. The second thing is you need to make a choice. Choose to be open to new information. Choose to be humble. Maybe you have to unlearn some of the information that you previously gathered and learn something new. And then you got to choose to implement. Make a choice to implement the information that you've received. Implicit bias is a term that's been used very frequently, most recently as a result of many of the atrocities that have happened in America over the last couple of years. The injustices that have taken place, the killing of unarmed people, many of these events have been attributed to implicit bias. Some people don't believe it exists, but it absolutely does. And now we have to get into how to manage it. But before we do, I want to talk about what a bias is. A general bias is favoritism, it's prejudice, sometimes it's unfair judgment, and it shows up by way of behavior. It could be a bias that we develop towards anything. We could have a bias towards Popeye's chicken versus Kentucky Fried Chicken, or Fords versus Chevrolet cars. This is a bias. And it doesn't necessarily mean that it's a bad thing. It's a preference. It's what we choose, and it's based on our experiences. It's based on what we know about a thing. That's a bias. We can agree that we all experience bias. It's something that we all experience. It's a little different from implicit bias when it comes to racial injustices and things of that nature. But I wanted to point out that a bias is something that we all share. We're going to get into how we form biases and how we form implicit bias. Now, implicit bias is something that's a little different from a general bias. Implicit bias happens on the subconscious level, whereas with a general bias, we're making a conscious decision to choose something over the other. With implicit bias, it happens unbeknownst to us. Sometimes it happens and we're not even aware that it's happening. It's a result of stereotypes, images, things that we see on a regular basis. It's a result of the pairing of a group of people to a characteristic, and us now associating those two things together. For example, a topic in continuous discussion is illegal immigration. Oftentimes we see images of Hispanics or Mexicans with illegal immigration. An implicit bias could be formed this way with these images constantly being shown to us. And we can begin to treat people in accordance with illegal immigration, which would be unfair to them because not all Hispanics are here illegally. Another example is Muslims being associated with terrorism. As a result, many Muslims have been ridiculed or ostracized, which is completely unfair to them. So to recap, implicit bias is a result of the images, the pairing of a group of people with particular characteristics and unfair judgment as a result. It's something that we all have the potential for, and it's something that we need to be aware of so that we can manage it. Now it's time to get into some tips. Tip number one, be aware of your filter. Your filter is the body's security system. We all have it. It's how we sort information as we receive it. We sort information into safe zone versus unsafe zone. We got to know whether it's safe to interface with a person or a place or an event. If we don't, we're left stranded. We're left without a life jacket in this world. We have to have a security system. It's something we all have. We filter people and we filter things. But we got to understand that it exists, and we got to understand how it impacts our thoughts. Because as we filter information, we're filtering information based on our experiences, knowledge of information that we've received. And some of the information could be wrong, but we got to understand what's happening in that moment in real time. When we interface with a new person, we're filtering information to determine if it's safe to communicate with this person, to approach this person, Is it safe to engage with this person or is it unsafe? That's tip number one. Tip number two, collect data. Oftentimes, this is something that's bypassed. People jump straight from filtering to judgment, which is completely unfair because you haven't collected information. You haven't gotten to know the person who you're judging. For example, maybe you have a new colleague, somebody who's new to your team, and a new partner, somebody that you have to now work with, and they're a different race. You've already placed judgment on that race. And so prior to judging that person, you want to collect data. You want to get to know who they are. You want to give that person the opportunity to prove to you who they are before placing judgment. Collect data. Tip number three, judge fairly. Judgment is something that's going to happen. We're going to judge. That's part, again, of the security system of our bodies. We filter. If we collect data, we'll judge appropriately. Judgment gets a negative connotation, which is not fair. Right now, if we go to court and we get a fair judgment, we get a favorable judgment, we're going to be happy. So it's not the judgment that's a bad thing. It's how we treat people. So to judge fairly, we want to make sure that we maintain respect, even if we come to a conclusion based on the collection of data. If we come to a conclusion that maybe this person isn't somebody that we like or somebody that we want to associate with, we still treat them fairly. Because there could be a chance that our data collection was off. Maybe it was a bad day. Maybe it wasn't a good time. And so we always maintain respect. Judge fairly. So to recap, we've given some tips on how to better manage implicit bias. First tip was to be aware of our filter. Understand how our filter impacts our thinking. We need to collect data before we place judgment. And then we need to judge fairly. Be respectful at all times. Now we need to get into what I like to call choice blockers. Because it takes choice. We got to choose to take these steps, right? But there are some things that block us. There's some things that get in the way. Let's get into the choice blockers. Now that we're aware of what implicit bias is and those ways that we can manage for it, we got to understand what gets in the way of us taking those steps that we discussed earlier. There's several things that I call choice blockers. The first thing is trauma. You could have had a traumatic event that actually happened between you and people or a person of another race that's influenced how you view that race. You could be afraid, fear. It takes courage, it takes faith to take the step to get to know somebody and collect data. Fear could be in the way of you doing that. Could be a superiority complex. Maybe you feel like you're better than other people or better than other races. It could be an inferiority complex. Maybe insecurity stops you from getting to know another person or collecting data because you feel like, well, if I collect that data and find out about this person, I may find out that they're just as smart as me. They're just as talented as I am. These are real things that get in the way. These are real things that get in the way of making a choice to get to know someone before judging. If any of these characteristics sound like you, I suggest seeking some help. As a professional, these are things that I help people through every day, all day. Healing from past trauma, dealing with fear, dealing with superiority or inferiority. These are your choice blockers. As we wrap up the discussion on implicit bias, we've talked about those things that get in the way of us making a choice to do something different. But if we allow those choice blockers to get in the way of us managing our implicit bias, we could be missing out on a golden opportunity to just connect with other people, to learn other people, to grow, to actually be stronger. And we also could be missing out on an opportunity to continue to evolve. One thing that's true is that change is constant. It's constantly happening around us, and we have to choose to change and grow with change. We got to choose to adjust the prescription in our lens, how we see the world. Otherwise, we may be left behind. That's the discussion on implicit bias. Hopefully, this is giving you some tips and helps you to see yourself differently, become more self-aware, and to actually create a desire to do something different, and hopefully you'll make a choice. This is Dr. Robert Evans III, founder and CEO of Empowerment Counseling and Training Services. For more information on our training services, please visit us at empoweredtoday.net.